Someone left a comment on one of my videos on my other channel, and in it they said that they disagreed with this concept of you are enough, that you're enough and I'm enough. And their reasons for disagreeing with it is they felt like it was a bit of a cop-out, that it somehow shirked personal responsibility to continue to improve oneself. That if you already believe you're enough, that you won't try to attain anything and you won't take any action, which is going to lead to a kind of a state of doing nothingness. So they felt it was unhelpful. Now I understand how someone could end up at that conclusion when we're talking about things like self-acceptance, self-compassion, whether you're already enough or not, because they sound like very soft topics that are not focused on action. And so today in this video, I want to share with you some common misunderstandings about concepts like self-acceptance and explore whether there is a downside to having these kinds of approaches in how you're thinking about yourself and navigating life. So the first misconception is, if I accept myself, I will somehow lose motivation. Because if you're somebody who uses fear and shame and guilt as a way to kind of push yourself and make yourself do things, maybe you've got quite a loud critical voice in your head, if all of that went quiet, how would you get yourself to do anything? When I was stuck in this cycle of fear and shame and guilt around some compulsive behaviors that I was trying to break, what was happening was I was in this constant battle with myself. That shame and that fear and that guilt felt so heavy, and I was trying to feel better, but part of me didn't believe that I even deserved to feel better. And so there was just this inner resistance all the time, and it was draining. It didn't actually take me to where I wanted to get to, which was to break free of these compulsions. And part of this reason was I think I was losing so much energy through trying to use this fear and this shame to force myself to do it differently because of the constant battle. All that lovely energy was going to waste, lovely energy that could be fueled to make changes, but actually the emotional cost of it meant I didn't have the energy available. And then the other way that it worked against me was there is a part of me that just wants to rebel when I feel like I'm not free, when it feels like external pressures and control. So while this is all going on inside me and all these shoulds are going on inside me, there's a part of me that just wants to go, F it. Let's just go and do that thing that we said we weren't going to do just because we can. And maybe people who haven't experienced that shame and that fear as loudly as some of us have can't understand why, a bit of shame, a bit of fear here and there could be a motivator because it works for them. So you know if this is you because all this stuff has been or is very loud for you right now. And self-acceptance quietens this down. And the idea is that in the quietening down, we might actually be able to hear a more grounded voice inside of us that can help to guide us. In my psychotherapy training, I train in transactional analysis, and there was a concept by the founder, Eric Berne, called PHYSIS, spelt P-H-Y-S-I-S, I think. And Eric Berne was saying that PHYSIS is like a life force that all of us have in ourselves, in our bodies and in our minds, and that PHYSIS, what it wants is to be well and to heal. And so my experience of like fear and shame and seeing yourself as broken, like impedes, it blocks this life force. And what the acceptance does and the self-compassion and the reduction of these scary feelings is that another part of us can emerge instead, a part that does still want to move forward and to work on self-improvement and to grow. And another misunderstanding, which kind of flips a bit, is the idea that wanting to change means you don't accept yourself. So if you're somebody who's been working on the self-acceptance, you might find yourself in a bit of a conflict when you see something and you think, I want this thing to be different about myself, or I want to change this thing, but I'm supposed to accept myself. So how do I reconcile wanting to change with acceptance? And here's the thing, for many of us, our culture is set up in a way for very binary thinking. Something is either this or it's that. And actually, I think true emotional intelligence and wisdom comes from the capacity to hold different truths at the same time. So what feels like an opposite, accepting versus wanting change, can absolutely coexist. They don't have to cancel each other out. Because acceptance can just be, I am not constantly resisting the reality of my experience now. I'm not constantly telling myself everything should be different now. Acceptance for me is just accepting the here and now, the starting point where we currently are. It's like if you're trying to get from A to B and you refuse to accept that you are at point A, then how do you even begin to plot your route? Quite often we don't like where we're at. We want to already be at the end. And so we're kind of trying to act like we're already at the end, but we haven't actually gone through what it might take to create the changes that we are trying to create, because we're still losing energy in that fight about we should have done more already, we should be different already. So acceptance is just here and now. And we may have an innate drive in us to want to change and grow. And those two things can absolutely harmoniously coexist. And the third misconception is along the lines of, if I work on changing, that means I'm somehow rejecting who I am. So how we are thinking, feeling and behaving, we often get in patterns with this, right? We have habits and ways of being. And so if we are trying to change that, we're already so identified with the old way of being that trying to do something new, because it might feel so different to the old that you might be trying to accept, it can feel so uncomfortable. It can feel false even, because it feels like this is just not who you are. So self-acceptance doesn't mean getting so attached to this version of yourself that I have to accept everything about it, so that change feels like I'm somehow rejecting this previous identity. That's not going to serve us. So even in acceptance, recognizing that identity can be fluid, I think is crucial for change. So there can be a risk if self-acceptance is adopted too rigidly, of like holding on to this version of yourself that you have decided to accept. It's kind of accepting who you are now, almost like less like this and more like this. So there's the grasping nature that can come in, even in a soft approach like self-acceptance. And the fourth misunderstanding is that self-acceptance means I'm supposed to like myself or like everything about myself. And that's not true either. But it's that constant pushback against believing you are not how you're supposed to be now. Sometimes it's easier to understand acceptance by looking at its opposite, which is self-rejection. So it could be that, first of all, actually I'm not quite sure about this acceptance thing, but I can see how continually to reject myself isn't helpful. And of course, with self-acceptance, there are so many different areas of ourselves to accept. So some might be harder than others. You might be able to accept yourself in one area, and in another, it's much, much more challenging. My current challenge is around accepting my health, because I've got a few health struggles at the moment. And so trying to come to that place of acceptance isn't about going, oh, I like my current health status, but I know that what's making it worse is the frustration, the feeling of not fairness, the self-judgment that I feel like there's always more I could be doing to improve my health. These things that I'm currently trying to unpick, I can see how they're not serving me. And so I have times where I am able to accept, and then I experience the freedom. And so I think it's really important as well to say acceptance isn't something that you should do. Sometimes people feel bad that they're struggling with the acceptance. This is not another thing for you to feel like you are failing at, if you are failing to accept something about yourself. I am not wrong for feeling frustrated, for having some resistant thoughts about my health. It's not a right or wrong thing, but what I'm doing is I am continuing to inadvertently make it worse than it has to be. So for me, acceptance is about freedom, because I know that it frees me to be able to accept. And accept, again, doesn't mean passive, doesn't mean I don't do anything about it. It means that I am conserving energy that I would be using feeling bad in that resistance, constantly saying how it shouldn't be the way that it is. I free that energy up to actually be able to look after myself better. And the fifth misunderstanding is this idea that change needs to come from dissatisfaction. It's like a negativity bias, this idea that we have to see something as a problem in order to do something about it. And I don't think that that has to be the case. And I think we need to reframe this, because I think actually self-improvement ideally should be a satisfying experience in and of itself, rather than I'm trying to get to this destination and I don't care how miserable I am along the way. Which is not to say we don't challenge ourselves or make ourselves uncomfortable. There is something in the human nature that is commonly observed that no matter what people have, they always want more. Now that can come from a chasing place with this idea that you have to arrive somewhere and that you are trying to constantly attain, and that somehow that wanting more is always about being greedy and never being satisfied. But I think there's another side to this. And this is another example of holding several different viewpoints at once. Because also I think that maybe part of the reason we don't settle and we're going like, I'm satisfied and I'm done, is because there is a part of us that is curious, that wants to explore more things. What would it be like if I have this experience? What would it be like if I achieved this goal? What would it be like to go through the process of this? We might seek novelty, we might seek change. There's a resistance probably, I imagine, in most of us, where we don't want to stagnate. But when we remove this idea that there is a place that you are going to arrive where you've finally done it and you have self-actualized, I think that's probably more helpful. Whether there is a place where you can self-actualize and be completely satisfied about everything, I don't know. What I do know is I don't think it's helpful for me to think of it like that. Because as long as I think there's somewhere where I'm supposed to arrive, where everything is okay, then where I am now doesn't feel okay. And then I spend pretty much the entirety of my life not feeling okay about myself or where I am in life. And so I want to challenge the notion that self-improvement is inherently anti-acceptance. So how can you tell the difference if you're trying to improve from a place of I do accept myself versus a place that I don't? And I would say it's like an inner tension. It might look like always living in the future. It might look like feeling terrible now that you haven't already changed. I think this is the place that gets people so stuck. They look at where they want to be, they see where they are now, and then that distance just creates a feeling of hopelessness. There's like a chasm of despair between the two. And that feels very different to having a sense of, gosh, there's areas in my life that I still want to work on. I feel like my life work is trying to constantly uncover my blind spots, to try to understand my own reactions, and to continually try and find that experience of freedom that isn't rebellion. Rebellion has to come when we feel like we're not free, whereas freedom is more like, or rather the freedom that comes from self-acceptance is more like, oh, I realize how I'm the one who's been binding myself up. And I have the power to have a different experience of my life in this moment. I don't have to wait until then. I can feel free right now. Whether I'll be able to do it 100% consistently every single day, probably not. And ultimately, if you want to check in with your acceptance levels, it probably looks like, how are you feeling about where you are in your life right now? How are you feeling about your life right now? How are you feeling about yourself right now? And ultimately, the take home from this video is you are allowed to want to make changes. And it doesn't mean that there is anything wrong with where you are right now. Can those two things, those two truths, coexist? Because when they do, I think you get the best of both worlds. If this topic is of interest to you, I have done another video about acceptance versus giving up. So how can you tell when you're accepting versus when it feels like you're just so defeated because you can't change anything? And it's important to make the distinction there. So you might want to check out that video, wherever it is. And then until next time, stay conscious and keep growing.